The story begins with the protagonist Jibong Kim, who is working at his part-time job at the Goo convenience store. As he was in the store on duty, and there he was scanning the items with the barcode scanner. He scanned the item and gave it to the buyer, telling him the price of that item. Kim asked 401 for that item, and the buyer clanked the coins before him on the counter. The buyer takes his stuff from there and turns to leave, while Kim stands there on the counter, greets him, and asks him to come again to the store. However, Kim is a 20-year-old college student and a part-time worker who's happily enjoying an ordinary life. Kim, thinking about his life's current situation, makes a bored face, telling himself that he is not happy with his life. Then he sits down on the ground to collect the coins. While collecting the coins, he asks himself, how could anyone enjoy a life like this? After some time, he stands inside the store looking out of the glass window, thinking it's always the same old routine and the same old views. Then he sighed, thinking it was boring. Standing there in the store, he made a bored face because he was tired of his daily routine. As he stood near the window, his phone rang, and it was a message notification. He picked up his phone from the counter to check, and there was a message from his mother. His mother asked him what is he doing. He opened the message, thinking mother's message. He replied that he was on his shift at the store. Then he asked his mother did she wanted to tell him something. His mother replied she just noticed that it was his payday today, and then she asked him to bring some fried chicken in return. Kim stood there reading the message and smiled, thinking he guessed today was his payday, and his mother was more aware of it than he was. Kim replies all right, he got it. Furthermore, he says he will buy one marinated and one regular fried on his way back. As he sends this message, his mother replies make it the soy sauce one over the regular fried one for her son, and in reply, Kim sends his mother the hot mouth emoji. As he was chatting with his mother, suddenly he heard a loud noise outside. Hearing this noise, he got scared and his phone slipped from his hand. After this, he, holding his phone, looks outside, asking himself why suddenly this noise occurred. He ran toward the door to check what was happening outside. He opened the store door to check, thinking that sounded like some kind of explosion. As he stood there at the door, he was shocked to see the huge monster destroying the city. Sees that destruction everywhere, he runs toward the road, and he gets scared to see that the monster has destroyed almost the whole city with fire. Kim stands there, looks up toward the monsters and the destroyed buildings, and asks himself what is going on. Then he surprisingly asks himself if is he dreaming. Looking all around, he says no, this is definitely all real. However, Kim nervously stands there on the road. He feels some noise behind him. He turns to look and is shocked to see the huge monsters coming toward him. He gets scared and thinks the first thing that comes to his mind is to run away from this place. Therefore, Kim screeches his shoes on the road and runs away from there, while thinking his mind is all muddled up and what is going on, where the monsters come from. While running away, Kim falters and thud on the road, and he gets injured. Lying there injured on the road, he heads up to look, and then he looks behind him, thinking he tripped over something that was not a very good time to do. Lying there on the road, as soon as he looked back, he was shocked to see his legs were no longer attached to his body. Sees this, he gets scared and asks himself why are his legs over there. Then he coughs and the blood spurts out of his mouth, and he plops on the road. Lying there injured on the road, he turns his head to look as the huge monster stands behind him, shaking its tentacles, and the bright purple aura was emerging from its tentacles. Kim looks toward the tentacle with his blood on it and asks himself did it got him with those tentacles. As the blood was flowing from Kim's mouth and his body was sliced, seeing this, he abused then thudded on the road. After some time, the sound of a ring occurred, and he got the notification window that the system's new announcement activating humanity's awakening program. Then another window occurs on which it was written they are initiating the awakening trial. Hearing that robotic voice, he heads up asking himself what. Then his head thuds on the road again, and lying there he thinks an awakening trial. Suddenly his sliced body started clanging, and the bright light started emerging as he lay there unconscious on the road, and the place where his body lay started turning into the holographic room. After some time he thuds into the holographic room, then he presses his head and back, which thud on the ground. He heads up asking himself where he is, but as soon as his eyes fall on the legs that are now attached to his body, he starts shuddering, asking himself if his legs are reattached to his body and his injuries are gone. Kim sat there in the holographic room, thinking the series of incomprehensible events completely blocked his mind. After this, he gets up and gets the notification window that greets players welcome to the awakening zone. Standing there, he turned his head and surprisingly looked up, asking what was that voice right now. Furthermore, he asked himself what it said in the awakening zone, then he looked around and asked what this holographic room was. He was completely blanked and scared because he didn't know where he was right now, what was happening to him, and what had happened to his body. However, Kim gets the notification window that initiates the awakening trial, generating a monster opponent. As he stood there, suddenly a huge monster appeared at his back. The monster created a loud noise. Kim turned his head to look. As soon as he looks back, he gets another notification window that Quest successfully strikes an attack on the test monster. And if he upon a successful strike, the monster will perish regardless of the amount of damage inflicted. Hearing this notification, Kim, while looking up at the monster coming toward him, fearfully asks, what is he saying? He wants him to land an attack on this monster. The monster angrily looks toward Kim and then extends its claw toward him to attack. Sees the monster's claw coming toward him, he gets scared. As he was about to fall backward because the monster's claw was huge, and when the monster swung its claw, the strong gust of wind blew. And Kim puts his hands in front of his face, fearfully thinking he is going to die. However, the monster put its claw on Kim and crashed him so hard on the ground that the dust smoke spread there. Therefore, the notification window appears that he has failed the awakening trail, and then another notification window appears that they are regenerating the player's body. However, Kim's body regenerated, and he stood there looking at his hands and body in amazement. Suddenly his eyes fall on the nearby blood and crushed body parts that are his own. Kim gets scared and starts shuddering, then asks himself what is he. Then he fearfully looked toward the cut hand lying on the ground, which was wholly covered with blood. Sees the hand, he fearfully thought that it was his hand. Seeing the blood and mutilated body parts there, he feels nauseous and stands there. He starts vomiting. While vomiting, he sat there thinking about regenerating, but it couldn't be. Meanwhile, the monster moved toward him to attack. Sees the huge monster coming toward him. Kim, with teary eyes, looks up toward the monster and starts shuddering. However, Kim starts trembling while saliva starts coming out of his mouth. The monster roars, and he quickly gets up and starts running away. But this time, the monster slashes its tentacles and cuts off Kim's head and separates it from his body. Kim's head and body thud on the floor. While lying there, he sobs and the tears flow from his eyes, and he coughs with his sliced head. However, the notification window appears that he has failed the awakening trial, and they would regenerate the player's body. After this, Kim's body regenerates, and he stands there surprisingly looking toward himself. As he stands there, the quest window appears. That quest window was about successfully striking an attack on the test monster, and upon a successful strike, the monster will perish regardless of the amount of damage inflicted. However, he gets scared to see the monster appear there and move toward him to attack. Seeing the monster coming toward him, he shouts, asking himself, what is this? What is he supposed to do, and how can he ever kill a monster like that? As the monster steps toward him, Kim fearfully steps backwards. Suddenly, the notification window appears that he can't kill the monster. Then another notification window appears that the test monster is programmed to be a transcendent tier creature. His chances of killing them are 0. Kim stands there surprisingly looking up toward the notification window, and then looking toward the monster, he fearfully clenches his teeth, asking himself if they reply to what he is saying. Then he raises his voice and clenches his fists, asking who is he and where has he taken him. Then he angrily asks why did he bring him there. In response, a notification window appears that this is the testing area for a player's awakening trail. The location was designed to assure the fairness of the trial. Kim surprisingly looked up toward the notification window, asking the player, awakening fairness, because he didn't understand what was happening there. Where in the room he stands, his corpses scattered all over because he killed and regenerated so many times. As he stands there blankly because he is unable to understand the situation happening to him, the notification window appears before him that humanity is a species capable of awakening its full potential. Then another notification window appears that the awakening trial will end once he has awakened his abilities and successfully attacked the monster. When this is finished, he will be returned to the real world. Also, do not be concerned about dying in the middle of the test. His body will be regenerated no matter how many times he dies in this area. Hearing that notification, Kim clenches his teeth, asking regenerated do they think of his life as a video game and smoothing. Then stands there with a sad face. He thinks the whole thing sounded like a pretext for a fantasy novel, but he still had to believe what they said, because the pieces of his corpse were scattered right next to him. Then he clenches his teeth, thinking he is supposed to be a player, and he is never even given a choice while the monster roars and moves toward him. As the monster moved toward him, he fearfully stepped backward. The monster roared and created a magic ball with his voice and threw that huge magic ball toward Kim. That huge magic ball crashed Kim on the ground of that holographic room, but he with all his might skid and came out of that explosion, thinking he was forced to either repeat a painful death or accept the whole situation. However, Kim came out of that exploded magic ball and stood in the smoke. A bright wavy light started emerging from his body, and he got the notification that awakening success. His stats and abilities will now be generated, and then his stats window appear before him on which his HP, strength, agility, and mana are mentioned. Also, his level was increased from 0 to 1, his strength was increased to 25. His agility was increased to 11 and his mana was 22. Also, he got unique traits. Kim, after reading his stat window, clenched his fist, screeched his foot, and run toward the monster to attack him. As soon as he ran toward the monster, he got the notification window that awakened his ability and his physical enhancement. Kim with all his might made a fist and jumped toward the monster to punch him, thinking there was only one option for him. He had to accept everything they threw at him and finish this miserable trial. However, Kim punches the monster with all his might and crashes it. The smoke emerges from its body, and the monster gets cracked. Kim punched the monster, threw away parts of its broken body, and stood there. He got the notification window that the damage successfully inflicted. Awakening trial was complete. Then another notification window appears, and they congratulate him on his awakening. Hearing that voice, Kim smiled, and then he excitedly cheered up, and then another quest window appeared before him that he had completed the quest successfully. Also, he has obtained the physical enhancement ability. A wavy light came out of Kim's body, and he stood there thinking that he would return to the world. As the wavy light was still coming out of his body, he stood there silently thinking, and then he looked all around the holographic room. Then he looked up and raised his voice asking what was going on. He said the trial was complete, stop messing around, and let him out of there. However, many notification windows appear before him that the errors have occurred, and he is unable to leave the testing area due to unknown error. Kim stands there sweating and panicking and asks what. Then another notification window appears before him, and they inform him that they are initiating the awakening trial. Therefore, the huge monster appears before him, and he silently looks toward the monster asking what is he talking about. He can't leave the testing area. As Kim stood there was blank and didn't understand what was happening around him. Meanwhile, the monster attacked Kim with its claw and split him. They regenerated Kim's body while his previous corpse was lying near him on the floor. As his body was regenerating, he slightly smiled, saying give him a break. Then he raised his voice asking what is this. Meanwhile, the monster attacked him with its claw and splashed him again. Kim's body parts splash on the floor and they start regenerating his body again. After his body regenerated, he sat there on the floor thinking of an unknown error. It was like a bug in a video game, and he was stuck in this dimension for an eternity. Like a bugged-out video game character, he went through the endless cycle of death and regeneration for a week, a month, a year. He sits there blankly thinking, his mind slowly wasted away, while his corpses are lying there on the ground all around him. Furthermore, with the hopeless face, he thinks he was constantly regenerated physically, but not mentally. But then a window notification appears before him that his vitality has increased, and they are modifying backup data. Kim surprisingly looks toward his status window and jumps asking vitality to increase, modifying backup data. In response, the notification window appears that he has increased his vitality by repeatedly taking hits from his opponent. He stood there before his notification window status, thinking he didn't care about how it happened. Then he asked himself, did it just said that the backup data was being modified? Then he looked up excitedly, asked then did the unknown error had been fixed as well, and in response, the window appeared that the error had not been changed, and he was unable to leave this area for eternity. Kim hears that voice hopelessly smile, and then the monster appears there and moves toward him to attack. However, Kim, while running away, thought some time went by again, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. He tried everything he could do to run away. He even tried to resist being killed by the monster. Therefore, his status window appeared before him, and this time his HP was above 1000, his MP was above 500, and his strength was above 80. Furthermore, his agility was above 40 and his mana was above 50. He read that status window thinking these efforts increased his stats immensely, but they were all meaningless. In those years the monster killed him thousands of times, and every time the monster killed him they regenerated his body. Kim stands there injured, thinking he remembers what had happened on the first day, and he decides to stop resisting. However, when he came to that holographic room, the first day the window appeared before him that the test monsters were programmed to be transcendent tier creatures. His chances of killing them were 0. Moreover, 10 years after his confinement, he says the system that he wants to ask a question. Kim hopelessly asks the system what's happening outside on Earth right now. The system replies nothing much has changed on Earth, times move 300 times faster in this dimension than it does on Earth. Furthermore, for 10 years there are about 12 days in his world. Hearing this, Kim stands there and says 12 days, then he clenches his teeth, remembering the message from his mother when she asks him to bring fried chicken for her. Then Kim, with a sad face looking toward his hand, says he promised to buy some fried chicken for his mother. Meanwhile, the monster attacks him and crashes him. After this, they regenerate his body again, and he sits there in the holographic room thinking 500 years after his confinement. Everything becomes blurry to him, his family, his friends. He had even begun to forget who he was. Only one question lingered in his mind: why did this thing happen to him? However, Kim sat there on the floor, folding his arm. Meanwhile, the monster moved toward him from a side to crush him. As the monster from upside down extended its claw toward Kim, while he sat there was asked why, and he repeatedly asked his question. As the monster's claw came near him, he sat there looking down, punched the monster with his hand, and crashed its claw. The monster roared. Kim sat there, clenched his teeth, and angrily asked why. Then he shouted and raised his voice, asking why as he was still shouting. Moreover, he raised his voice asking humanity to awaken the trial's fairness and the player's abilities. All of those didn't matter to him anymore. He only wanted to know one thing. Then he asked them why this error happened to him. Then, with a hopeless voice, he says he only wanted to live a happy life, and then remembers the time he part-time work in the store and clenched his teeth. He was furiously thinking about this all. Meanwhile, the monster moved toward him from behind his back to attack him. He stands there furiously thinking there is only one target for his suppressed anger to turn to. Thinking this, he jumps toward the monster and punches him with all his might. However, 10 years after humanity's awakening day on Earth, a crack appeared in the sky, an error message stating that an immeasurable burst of energy had erupted within the server. The system's firewall has been destroyed. After breaking through the crack with his fist, Kim came out of that holographic room while the trial monster inside had already perished. Kim stood up there in the sky while the wavy bright light was coming out of his body. However, the total period of his awakening trial was 3,000 years, during which he was able to reach the maximum level for all of his stats. Kim HP, MP, Strength, Agility, and Mana were reached to maximum level. However, the system counter is unable to connect to the main system due to a system error. Also, they are initiating offline self-synchronization. Kim stands there in the sky, slightly opening his eyes, thinking every day for the past 3,000 years he has thought about the very first thing he wants to do once he returns to Earth. And he remembered the message from his mother when she asked him to bring some fried chicken for her. As he stands there, the notification window appears before him that system synchronization is complete. 10 years have passed on Earth since his departure. Kim stands there up in the sky and looks down toward the city, asking the system to find his mother's location right now. The system replies, unable to run the search engine. This feature is unavailable in offline mode. Hearing this, Kim sighed, saying to the system, it was as useless as ever. Then he descended to Earth to find his home. Kim arrived in the city where he lived and stood outside the building where he lived with his family. Seeing the situation of the city, he worriedly asked what happened to their house, because the whole city was destroyed and barren. Meanwhile, 2 military soldiers pass by him holding their guns, and looking toward him they stop there. One of them calls out to Kim and asks him to listen to him. Kim stands there and turns his head to listen to him, and the soldier steps toward him holding his gun, informing him this place is a restricted area for civilians. Then he requested that move back to the safety zone. Immediately Kim looked toward the soldier, surprisingly thinking the military soldier had just called their neighborhood a restricted area. Kim stands there asking the soldier what exactly happened there. Hearing this, soldier surprisingly asks Kim what he means, and Kim stands there before them, asks them how this area became so demolished. Hearing this, one of the soldiers starts dizzying, while the other one, his companion, stands beside him, turns his head and looks toward him. Then he sighs, and with closed eyes and a sad face, he asks Kim if Sir has been living under a rock. Then he tells Kim this entire region was destroyed during the dungeon break 10 years ago. Hearing this, Kim gets shocked and clenches his teeth thinking dungeon break, then asks himself if is he talking about the disaster back then pointed toward the building where he used to live with his family, he asked the soldier what happened to the people living there. The soldier sighed and squeezed his eyes answering, they were all killed. Hearing this, Kim was shocked and started trembling, became speechless, and asked himself if all killed his mother. As he was thinking, the soldier stood before him and told him to wait, then he thoughtfully told some people who survived because they were outside. Furthermore, he heard the government evacuate them to a safety zone, and looking toward Kim he said he should head over there if he wanted to find them. Hearing this, Kim angrily looks toward the soldier and grabs his collar asking, where is this place? The soldier gets scared and starts shuddering. Then the soldier starts sweating and holding Kim's hand pointing ahead replies, it was the shanty town in the B neighborhood. The other soldier holding the gun with one hand put his other hand on his companion's shoulder. Hearing this, Kim released the soldier's collar while both soldiers were scared. After this, Kim turned and ran away from there, and the soldiers standing behind were scared. Then the soldier whose collar Kim grabbed put his hands on his heart and sighed. Later, both the soldiers stand there and hear through the radio that was attached to one of them's shoulder with the belt. They alert the soldiers, informing them they have a situation on their hands, a dungeon break is imminent in a nearby area. Also, the estimated location is the shantytown's emergency sector in the B neighborhood. Hearing this news, both Soliter fearfully look toward each other. However, in the B neighborhood emergency sector, a bright wavy light emerges in the sky while the military jeep screeches in that area. And from one of the jeeps, Hyungjun-oh, lieutenant colonel of the Capital Defense Force, comes out holding the cigarette in his mouth with his hand. However, the military jeeps gather in that area, and the military soldier stands around Lieutenant Colonel. He stands there holding that cigarette in his mouth, raises his voice saying secure the perimeter and calls for reinforcement. Then looking toward the sky where the bright light circle was emerging, he shouted the dungeon break's about to unleash. There is no way they can stop this on their own. Then he angrily looks behind the soldier and shouts at him asking what happened to the guild support is still not there. The soldier salutes him answering, no sir, they have just been dispatched. Hearing the colonel angrily hit his fist on the jeep. And then he abuses the guild support shouting they must be taking it slow because this is a shanty town and they are trying to take more of their funding. After this, Jai Yun Lee, first lieutenant of the Capital Defense Force, came to Lieutenant Colonel with a sad face asking what should they do now sir. Lieutenant Colonel stands beside the jeep and turns his head angrily asking what she thinks they should do. Then he shouts from a line of defense and deals with the small monsters for now, and they will shoot the bigger ones down once they get some backup. Hearing this, Yun Lee gets speechless, and then points ahead. She asks if is he serious sir, then she raises his voice saying all of the civilians will be killed if they do that. However, Lieutenant Colonel shouts at her asking if would she rather have all of them killed by the monsters instead. Then Lieutenant Colonel abuses her saying just go and form a proper line, they will all be screwed if they let a monster escape from there. Hearing this, Lieutenant Yun Lee gets scared and speechless. As the military soldiers holding their weapons gather in Area B, meanwhile Kim steps there, stands behind the soldier jeep, looks toward that area, and asks himself what is going on and why are there so many soldiers there as well. Then stands there, he asks the system what's going on around there. The system responds a dungeon break is imminent in B's neighborhood. Furthermore, the dungeon will spawn in approximately 3 minutes, and hear the voice of that window. Kim stands there think a dungeon break. Then he asks himself if a disaster is going to happen in this neighborhood, and then he clenches teeth thinking his mother is in danger. However, Kim steps ahead to enter that area while the military soldiers stand there holding their weapons. They surprisingly turn their head and look toward him while he keeps stepping toward that area. Then one of the soldiers stops him there by putting a hand on his shoulder and requesting him to move back because the dungeon break is imminent in this area. Then says he has to evacuate this area. Hearing this, Kim stands there and doesn't stop and angrily looks toward the soldier. However, looking toward him, the two soldiers falter and thud backward on the road, and Kim stands in between the soldiers and angrily looks toward them. While the soldiers gather around him get scared on the other side, Lieutenant Colonel and Yun Lee stand far from the soldiers discussing the important matter. Lieutenant Colonel looks toward the soldier and Kim angrily shouts asking who let a civilian in there. Then he raises his voice and gets him out of there immediately, while Yun Lee stands beside Lieutenant Colonel surprisingly looking toward Kim. After this, on Lieutenant Colonel's order, all the soldiers clunk their guns toward Kim and gather all around him. Kim silently stands in between the group of soldiers. Then he clenches his teeth and angrily looks toward the soldier and says "Scram," while the soldier stands there starts shuddering, and they all retreat and he passes between them. Sees this, Yoon Lee scolds the soldiers asking what are they doing, they can't let a civilian enter the danger zone. While the two soldiers sit there on the road, one of them recognizes Kim and fearfully replies, "Yoon Lee player, that man is a player, madam." Hearing this, Yoon Lee was surprised when the wavy purple light emerged from the sky. Kim kept stepping ahead toward that area, and the soldiers silently stood behind his back holding their guns. As the bright light keeps cracking in the sky, it signals the beginning of the dungeon break. The sky clangs from that side where the bright light is emerging. See this? The soldiers start shuddering. One of them fearfully asks, "The sky just shattered." However, the monster starts pouring out of the sky, and it causes the soldier to lose hope. Sees this, the soldier gets scared and starts trembling. A lot of monsters pour out of the sky, and they spread in the area roaring, while the soldiers stand there and shout, "That's the dungeon break." The soldier stands there fearfully looking up toward the monster spread in the area B. One of them fearfully looking up asks, "This is ridiculous, how are they supposed to defeat those things with guns?" The other one stands beside him and says they would just be committing suicide by going in there. Then he fearfully asks Yoon Lee if the guild support is not there yet, and she has no answer and stands there. She grits and runs away from there. Sees her running away, the soldiers stand there fearfully stopping her to extend their hands and calling out her name. She keeps running toward Area B where the monster spreads to attack with the fire. On the other side, Kim reached the Area B neighborhood. As he was climbing the stairs, a notification window appeared before him that the dungeon had been opened, guaranteeing a dungeon rank of 5 stars. And he, while climbing the stairs, clenches his teeth, thinking he is sick and tired of these dungeons and monsters. As he was climbing the stairs, 2 monsters from the roof of the houses next to the stairs moved toward him. One of the monsters roars and quickly moves toward him to kill him, while Kim silently keeps ascending the stairs. As the monster gets near him from his backside, he punches the monster and splits it. Sees this, the other monster moves toward him quickly while he stands there on the stairs, his back to them. The monster with several heads moves toward him to attack, and Kim stands there, turns and clenches the monster, saying "Get out of his way." Then he crashes the monster and falls him away. As Kim throws the monster away on the ground, the place where the monster falls, the ground breaks apart. However, the monster gets severely injured and tremble lying there on the cracked ground. Kim jumps on the monster's head and splits it. To see this, the other monster, his companion, gets furious and starts roaring. After this, a lot of monsters angrily move toward Kim to kill him, while he angrily attacks them and crashes many of them. Kim starts killing them one by one. He kills many of them, but many more appear there. He jumps up to attack the monster, hits them with his leg, and falls them away. Kim attacks 4 to 5 monsters in a single blow and crashes them all together. As he was killing them, meanwhile the dragon monster appeared there, and he jumped up and crashed the dragon monster with one hit, and throws the dragon corpse toward its other companions. Sees this, the other dragon monsters move toward him to attack him. However, Kim attacks them and splurts the dragon monster into pieces. Kim stood there in the air after killing them while the dragon monster's body pieces were falling. Kim jumps in the air and makes his fist hit the remaining dragon monster and crashes them. On the other side, Yoon Lee was running to find Kim, and finally, she arrived in Area B. She looked all around there thinking about where he was going. She saw him go this way. She climbs the stairs and stands upstairs. She is surprised to see Kim crashing, splurting, and cracking the monster in the air. However, looking up, she surprisingly says, "This is impossible. Even the military war machines are unable to stop a 5-star dungeon." Then, looking toward Kim standing there between the dead monster's corpse, she asks herself, how could a single person achieve this? After killing all the monsters, Kim stands there. Meanwhile, a huge explosion occurs far from him. Yoon Lee stands behind Kim and sees this explosion and gets scared. While Kim doesn't notice that explosion, and he silently stands there between the monsters' corpses. However, from that explosion, the boss monster appears and starts roaring, and when the boss monster sees his companion's corpse lying on the ground, he gets furious and his eyes turn red due to anger. Then he roars and extends his hands to attack Kim. Stands there. Kim gets the notification from the system that the boss monster has appeared. Also, another window appears before Kim that killing the boss monster will terminate the dungeon break. Hearing that notification voice, Kim clenched his fist and angrily looked up at the boss monster, and then he stepped toward the monster to kill him. Seeing Kim stepping toward him, the boss monster gets surprised, and then he angrily roars while Kim stands there angrily looks up toward the boss monster and clenches his fist. Sees the boss monster, Yoon-Lee plops on the ground and starts trembling, asking herself that's what a 5-star boss is. While the monster was roaring there, meanwhile, some citizens heard that noise got there and stood beside the wall. Yoon-Lee stands there, turns her head, and looks toward the citizens standing beside the wall, thinking they are the survivors of the neighborhood. While the citizens were sacredly looking up toward the boss monster, Yoon-Lee stood there, clenched her teeth, thinking this was their chance, they needed to evacuate them. Then she turned her head and looked toward the citizens, raising her voice, they must get out of there immediately. Hearing her words, the citizens look toward each other. Meanwhile, the monster roars, and they all get scared to hear that boss monster's voice. Hearing the boss monster's voice, they all start sobbing. Meanwhile, the boss monster runs toward the citizens to kill them. However, they cry and start running to save their lives. They all run away while Kim stands silently there on the road and doesn't move. While the monster was quickly moving toward them as the citizens were running to save their lives, among them a lady holding the hand of her little daughter was running. Her daughter was crying and asking for help when suddenly her foot tripped with her leg and she fell there on the road with her teddy bear. The little girl lying there on the road cries while calling out to her mother. Her mother turns and runs toward her daughter to take her with hers. Meanwhile, the boss monster gets near them and roars, and then he opens his huge mouth and throws her sticky tongue toward the lady and her daughter. Sees the monster's tongue coming toward them, the lady, while crying, holds her daughter tightly and hugs her. Meanwhile, Kim gets there and splits the monster, and the little girl hugging her mother stands there on the road and opens her eyes slightly to check why the monster hasn't attacked them. As she opened her eyes, she was surprised to see Kim standing there before them holding the monster's splurt mouth in hand. Then the lady holding her daughter runs away from there, thanking Kim for saving them from the monster, while Kim stands there, plop the monster's head on the road. However, the citizens were still running away to save their lives from the monster, and Kim stood there beside the splurt monster silently watching this all. After this, Kim stands there looking toward the citizen and asks the system to check if his mother is there. The system replies, receiving the command. Then a window appears before him, and he will begin searching the area based on his memory information. While Kim silently stands there to get the exact location of her mother, the system tells him 2 seconds until the search is complete. The time is counted down, and when the system informs the search is complete. Hearing this, Kim's eyes open wide and the system tells him 0 match found, exiting searching mode. However, Kim stands there, hears this, gets hopeless, presses his lips, and remembers his family when his mother lovingly calls his name, and when his father lovingly calls him his son. Also, he remembers his little sister when she calls him big brother. Remembering his family, Kim with teary eyes hopelessly stands there quietly. Then he thinks 3,000 years throughout all that time, he struggled to not forget them, but it all just feels so faint now. Kim, thinking this all, squeezes his eyes. Meanwhile, the monster gets there and roars behind him so loudly. While Kim silently stands there before the monster corpse, the monster roars so loudly that Yoon-Lee puts her hands on her ear and closes her eyes, thinking what's this noise. After this, she winked and looked toward the monster, while the monster cracked and threw the magic balls that he created in its mouth with that loud noise toward Kim. Kim silently stands there with his back to the monster and asks the system to activate his ability and physical enhancement skills. However, the system does the same. Kim asks it to be done, and the bright light spreads all around him. Therefore, the notification window shows that the physical enhancement is activated and his awakened mode is now on. Kim's eyes and hair start to glow. He turns his head, activates his energy, and remembers the chat that he had had with his mother before entering that holographic room. Then he jumped up toward the monster while remembering the time when he was chatting to his mother in the store. He hits the monster's magic ball with his hand and blocks his attack, remembering the message of his mother when she asks him to bring some fried chicken for her. Sees this, Yoon-Lee stands down surprisingly, looks up toward Kim, blocks the monster's attack, and thinks incredible he is deflecting the boss's attack out of the town. After deflecting the magic ball, Kim tapped on the ground while Yoon-Lee stood behind him and surprisingly looked toward him, thinking he didn't even leave a single one. The monster gets furious to see how Kim has blocked his attack and killed all his companions. Then he roars and angrily looks toward Kim and creates a huge magic ball in his mouth. The monster throws that magic storm from his mouth toward Kim, while Kim silently stands there in his power. A bright wavy light came out of Kim's hand, and he made a fist with his hand and ran toward the monster to kill him. As Kim ran toward the monster, tears were flowing from his eyes because he was missing his family and the time he spent with them. As he runs toward the monster, the tear from his eyes falls on the ground. The monster creates the magic tornado and throws it toward Kim, but that magic does not affect Kim. Sees this, the monster gets surprised and roars. Kim jumps toward the monster boss and punches him with his fist. The boss monster, with Kim's one punch, destroyed and starts disappearing. Sees this, the citizen and the military people stand there, get surprised, and then the bright light emerges from the sky and Kim's body is completely covered with that bright light. Kim stands there before the ruined ground and Yoon Lee sits there aside and sees this all. She is shocked and speechless. Kim stands there, deactivating his ability, and stares at the ruined ground with teary eyes, thinking he is tired of all this. Then he squeezes his eyes. Meanwhile, Kim's mother runs and quickly climbs the stairs holding the poster in her arms. Move toward Kim. See her. Yoon Lee sits there with folded legs on the ground and surprisingly looks toward her. Kim's mother, looking toward her son, extends her hand and smiles, stands behind her and calls out Kim's name. Kim stands there, turns his head and looks toward his mother. Sees his mother before him. He is surprised, and the notification window appears that voice data is identified. The information matches with the player's memories, while Kim, looking toward his mother, thinking the past 3,000 years ran through his mind. Tears start flowing from his eyes, and he stands there thinking. His long-lost emotions begin to burst within him. Kim cries out to his mother, and his tears drip down on the ground. On the other side, his mother stands before him, also cries, and while crying she puts her hand on her mouth. After this, both mother and son ran toward each other. As his mother ran, the poster she held in her arm fell from her hand and flew in the air. And that posters were of Kim's missing report. Furthermore, on that poster, Kim's name, a picture of the place where he worked, and all of his information were mentioned. Both of them tightly hug each other and burst into tears. Kim's mother holds his son tightly, sobbing, asking where in the world had he been. She searched everywhere, looking for him. Kim, while holding her mother, bursts into tears and presses his lips. He cries and apologizes to his mother for that. He can't get her fried chicken as he promised. As both of them stand there hugging each other tightly, the monster throws his tentacle toward Kim's mother and splurts her. That tentacle pierces Kim's mother's stomach and she takes a deep breath. Kim stands there holding his mother, and with teary eyes, he looks toward his mother and calls out her name. Also, the drops of blood spurts on Kim's face. Kim stands there thinking about 3,000 years, which is how long he spent training on top of his corpses, but this empowered body couldn't even protect the one he cared for. Kim's mother's blood dripped onto the ground, and the tentacle pierced from her stomach, and blood was flowing from her stomach. Also, the tip of that tentacle that pierced from his mother's stomach pricked on Kim's stomach, while Kim stood there holding his mother in his arms. The monster squelches the tentacle from Kim's mother's stomach, and she plops on the ground, then she thuds there. While Kim sits beside her, he calls out to his mother. The bloody monster swings its tentacle, while Kim sits there holding his mother in its arms, crying. Seeing this, the monster gets happy and squeaks its tentacle toward Kim. But before the monster attacks him, Yoon Lee gets there aside, clunks her gun, and starts shooting the monster. She hits the bloody monster, and the bullets pierce from its head. Kim put his mother's head in his lap and cried, calling out to his mother. His mother was injured, lying in her son's lap, brushing her hand on his face. Also, blood was flowing from her mouth. Kim's mother lovingly looks toward her son, saying don't cry, and that she loves him, and then her hand plops on the ground. Kim sits there holding his mother in his lap, looks up, screams, and cries. He feels hopeless and the darkness around him. However, in the 39th Battalion, Capital Defense Force in the control center, the lieutenant colonel was smoking a cigarette while sitting on a chair with his legs on the table, and Yoon Lee stands before her, folding her arm back. Colonel turns his eyes and looks toward her, asking if they have been talking about him non-stop. Haven't they? Yoon Lee replies, yes, sir. After this, Lieutenant Colonel clicks the lighter and lights the cigarette, saying goodness. Then he asks Yoon Lee what Kim is doing to gather so much attention in a single month. She replies he is clearing every dungeon he can find, and the nearby dungeons of this region have already been devastated. Further, she says the guild's complaints are piling up, and several are expected to take action very soon. In response, Lieutenant Colonel sits on his chair, smokes, and stays silent. He rips the envelope from his pocket, then extends his hand and puts it in front of her, saying they have their orders. She silently looks toward the envelope, and he says her recruit Jibong Kim before he causes any more trouble. On the other side, Kim is killing the monsters in the dungeon. He killed so many monsters there as he killed many of them. Meanwhile, a vast monster gets there. Kim attacks the monster and punches it in its stomach. The monster gets the hole there, and blood spits out of its mouth, and everything falls out of the monster's stomach. However, Kim skids and jumps toward the monster, attacking it with all his might, and a vast dust explosion occurs in the dungeon. As soon as the dust explosion ended, Kim stood there holding the monster's skull in his hand, and the blood was dripping from the monster's mouth. Sees this, a bunch of monsters get there holding the sword. Kim kills them all one by one with their sword. Moreover, the monster spurt corpse lying there around him on the ground, and thousands of more monsters run toward him to kill him. Kim pulls out the sword from the dead monster's corpse and raises it, then activates his physical enhancement ability. Kim's body starts to glow, and his eyes and hair turn gray. Also, the wavy light spreads around him, and the window that awakened mode level 1 is on appears before him. Kim creates the storm with his magic, and then he points the sword toward the monster, and due to that storm, the sword cracks into pieces. The storm moved toward the monster, and the ground cracked there due to that storm. However, the window appears that all monsters are eradicated and the dungeon has been cleared. After this, Kim sits on the stone under the sky on a rainy night, while Yoon Lee gets there holding the umbrella. She puts her umbrella on Kim. He heads up and looks toward her. She is getting drenched in the rain, but she raises her umbrella on Kim. Looking toward him, she says she searched everywhere for him. Then she slightly smiles and briefly introduces herself, saying that she is Jin Yoon Lee from the Capital Defense Forces. Furthermore, she says this was the first time they had met, but it wasn't the best time to introduce herself before. Kim sits there, head down, and silently listens to her, but doesn't respond. Sees this, Yoon Lee says she understands what he is going through with the monsters. Then she asks him if he wants to destroy all the dungeons in this world. Is she right? Then, looking toward him, she says, but that would be utterly pointless because the dungeons respawn after a certain amount of time. He would only waste his time and energy by venting like this. Kim doesn't respond to her, and she stands there in the rain, keeping the umbrella over him. Further, she stood there silently, staring at him. After some time, Kim replied, asking her if he should sit there and do nothing. Yoon Lee looked toward him, saying not what she was trying to say as she was about to complete her sentence. But before she completes her sentence, Kim adds his point, saying that for 3,000 years he had to suffer bone-breaking, flesh-ripping pain. Every single day back there, even as his body broke down and turned to dust, he still endured that hell to return to where he belonged. Then Kim quickly gets up, and that umbrella falls in Yoon's hands. She surprisingly looks toward him, and he stands there before her, looking into her eyes and asking, but all of that effort is wasted now. And she still wants him to corpse himself. Then, looking toward her with teary eyes, he asks if she wants him to endure more than this as they both stand in the rain. He stepped ahead to leave while she stood there, head down in the rain, gritting and turning, saying she would help him to get his revenge. Hear this, he stops there, and she stands behind him and says, "Dungeons monsters." She will help him get rid of all of them, but he has to come with her. Kim silently stands ahead of her in the rain, and she stands back at him, looking toward him. However, 6 months later, in intense care, Kim's mother was admitted, and she was in a coma. Kim goes to the hospital to see his mother. He stands outside, looks at her through the mirror window, and puts his hand on the window. He silently, looking toward his mother, smiles, calling out to her mother. Moreover, he says he has become a civil servant and a pretty high-ranking one, so he won't be able to visit as often now. Further, he asks if she knows how government employees are always busy. Then he smiles, saying don't be sick just because he is gone for a while, and asks her okay. After this, he brushes his hand on the window, saying he will be back soon, and then he opens his coat button and moves toward the exit door of the IQ. There, he scanned his thumb in the thumb scanner as he scanned the door open, and he came out. As soon as he came out, on either side, civil servant officers were there to take him. Seeing him there, they all salute him, and he extends his hand, gesturing to them all. It's all right, and then he steps ahead and pulls his tie. As he steps ahead, his clothes become physical armor, and he comes to his power. He activated his physical enhancement power. A bright light came out of his body, and he stood there, ordering the officer to let go. After this at night, they all go to the dungeon where the colossal monster hawks are flying. Kim stands in his activated energy and looks up toward the hawk monster. He jumps up. The monsters are squawking. He attacks the monsters and kills them all in one blow. After killing the monster hawk, Kim, in his power, stands there, and a bright aura emerges from his body. However, Captain Cheolbeek sits in the bar, wearing his uniform and hat on his head, sitting on the chair where he is drinking the wine. Also in the bar, the news was on television that the government had officially announced its relationship with the Shield Guild. Two reporters were giving this news when one told the viewers about the government's decision. Another one, the lady added her point, tells the viewers about discontinuing the Shield Guild's protective services in the Seoul metropolitan area. Captain Cheol sits on the chair, fills his glass of wine, adds the ice cube to the glass, and then clans it to melt the ice in the wine. After this, he gulps half a glass of wine, puts the glass on the counter, and sighs. Meanwhile, the director of the Shield Guild comes there and sits on the chair bedside Cheol. Captain Cheol heads down and asks him what business he has there. Looking toward Captain Cheol, the director grins and replies, asking what he means. He is just there to drink with their scouting Captain Cheolbeek. Hearing this, Captain Cheol remains silent, then he removes his hat from his head and, looking toward the director, replies, "Get to the point, sir." The director looks toward Captain Cheol and answers that honesty is what he likes about him. Then he asks if he is aware of him too, right? While Captain Cheol sits there gulping wine when the director smiles, saying to Captain Cheol that everyone's been talking about the men. Hearing this, Captain Cheol flinched the wine glass from his mouth while the news reporter on television was giving the news that due to the sharp decline in the dungeon breaks recently, experts have speculated that the government may have acquired a secret weapon, as Captain Cheol was still gulping wine and the director sat there listening to the news. Putting his hand in his pant pocket, he says the guy is ruining it for them out there. He has caused a significant setback in their business. However, while rattling the ice in the wine glass on the table, Captain Cheol asks the director if they should get rid of him. Hearing this, the director asks Captain Cheol why he always has to be so frightened talking about removing someone so quickly like that. Captain Cheol, refilling his wine glass, remains silent. After this, the director swishes the paper on the counter before Captain Cheol, and Captain Cheol sits there, turns his head, and silently looks toward the paper. However, the director grins and looks toward Captain Cheol, saying there has been an order to contact him and recruit him into the guild, and he will be treated as a team captain. Meanwhile, Captain Cheol starts to say something but stays silent and presses his lips together. Then he gets up, picks up that paper, and turns from there, holding his hat. Captain Cheol put that paper in the inner pocket of his coat and stepped toward the exit door, replaying understanding. While the director sits on the chair behind, looking toward Captain Cheol, he asks where he is going. He still needs to finish his drink. Captain Cheol creaks the door, answering he has done drinking already. However, the director sitting on the chair thunk and surprisingly looked toward the wine glass on the counter. On the other side, in the 5-star dungeon, the monster bird nests at nighttime, the sky is dark, and a bright light emerges in the sky. And from that bright light, Kim and his team members wearing their costumes appear. They all stand on the cliff, and Kim stands first while his team members stand behind him. Then, the notification window appears before Kim that he has entered the 5-star dungeon, the monster bird's nest. This dungeon is due for a dungeon break soon. Kim and his team stood up the cliff, looking down toward the monsters flying there as Kim stared at the monster. His team member stands behind him and informs Captain Kim that this is the last that's due for a dungeon break this month. Kim turns his head, answering all right, all units stand by at this location. After this, Kim jumped up the cliff toward the monster bird nest, while his team members stood there watching him. Kim flew in the air and moved toward the monster's nest while the monster's birds were squawking. Standing there in the air, Kim asks the system about the boss's location. The window appears before him, and the system responds to him, receiving a command scanning for the boss's location. As Kim stands there in the air, monster birds, while squawking, start gathering all around him. Kim punches the monster bird and splits it. After this, he starts crashing the monster bird. Then he sat on the monster bird, hit it, and jumped up. The monster fell away injured while Kim jumped up in the air. The window appeared before him with 5 seconds until the scan was complete as the time was counted down. In the meantime, Kim crashes many of the bird monsters. As the system says 3 seconds are left while Kim is crashing the bird monster's head, then he hits the monster and splits it. Sees this, many more monster birds, while squawking, quickly move toward him. As Kim was killing the monster bird, the system informed him that there was 1 second left. The bunch of monster birds gathered around Kim, and he crashed them all with his one hit. Meanwhile, the system tells him the location scan is completed. The boss is located 7-8 miles southeast of the current location. Kim kills the monster birds with his activated physicality enhancement power storm, and the bright light spreads there while all the monster birds crash. However, Kim stands in the air, and the bright light comes out of his body while the window appears before him, activating the ability of physical enhancement. Also, his awakened mode is on, and then Kim flies fast in the air and quickly crosses all the mountains in his path and finally arrives at the destination. Kim's body was completely covered with the bright light, and the window appeared before him that he had arrived at his destination exiting navigation mode. Kim stands there in the air. Meanwhile, the monster bird boss Albatross gets near him, and he looks up toward the monster boss. The monster boss Albatross angrily looks toward Kim and squawks, while he silently stands before it. On the other hand, Kim's team members stand up on the hill. One of them looks through the binoculars to find out what is happening on the other side. The team vice captain asks the one who was looking through binoculars how the situation was going. The one who is watching through the binoculars replies it will probably be over soon, with Captain Kim winning by a landslide. Hearing this, the team members murmur, and one of them surprisingly says incredible, he is defeating hundreds of monster birds and the boss by himself. He is a complete monster. After this, the vice-captain stands behind him and says alright, they should be moving soon as well, retrieve all of the mana stones they can find, and don't leave a single one behind. All the team members stand there, turn their heads, and reply yes, vice-captain. As they all stand there, suddenly a bright light emerges from behind. Sees this vice-captain, surprisingly thinks why, is the dungeon entrance opening right now. And from that light, a dagger swishes and moves toward them. Quickly sees the dagger coming toward them. The vice-captain's eyes wide open, and he fearfully thinks of a dagger. However, the dagger fips and splits the skin of the vice-captain's face, and the girl with her team comes out of that dungeon entrance holding swords. The girl attacked the vice-captain with her sword and slashed him. She stabbed the sword in the vice-captain's stomach, and he thuds down. Also, Captain Sheol had arrived with the attackers. However, the girl stood there holding